Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our channel Perspective. I am here with Martina and I am Lyzeth. Thank you all for joining us. And we are gonna sort of kick off a new series for us. One that we have been talking about for a while, one that we definitely feel is important for the both of us to talk through and learn. So it's going to be a journey of our perspectives, a journey of us learning, and really digging into white supremacy. If you watched our last video, we ended with talking about really seeing how white supremacy could be considered a public health issue. So through this whole series, we'll definitely touch on that and really dig in. But for this first video, we really just wanted to get some foundational understanding of what white supremacy is, get some definitions from the interwebs. So looking at, like Webster's dictionary and really kind of getting that off, and we'll kind of kick off. Like, Martina, anything you kind of want to say before we dig in?
I'm just, I'm real excited. This is sad to say, but I'm excited to talk about white supremacy because I feel like it's embedded in, like, if not all of our videos, most of our videos, we've talked about white supremacy or about the difference in races in pretty much almost every video. And so I think it's just a natural kind of next part to do is to actually talk a little bit about white supremacy. And what Lyzeth and I are hoping to do is kind of do this over a series of different videos. So we're thinking about, talking about COVID and how that has exacerbated white supremacy. Of course, everything that happened last summer with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, the police brutality, how that how white supremacy is all woven into that. And then most recently, talking about our Asian American and our Asian friends who are going through it right now. And, just a little bit, like, what the hell's happening with that, So, yeah, we have some other, ideas up our sleeves. So just stay with us as we're on this journey, I would say. Let's say,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think let's kick it off. Let's kick this journey off with the definition of white supremacy. So I pulled it up. I'm gonna read it from my tablet screen over here, and I'm getting it from Webster's dictionary online. And it comes up with two definitions. So it's two similar but different. The first one says that white supremacy is the belief that the white race is inherently superior to other races, and that white people should have control over people of other races. The second one is that white supremacy is the social, economic, and political systems that collectively enable white people to maintain power over people of other races.
So they both feed into each other.
Yes.
They basically the same definition.
Yes.
Yes.
And we had read this before we hopped on, and I said just even reading it makes me upset and so mad.
That's why I was like, we got to start, let's say, because I'm ready to talk. Like, this is some bull stuff. I'm trying to work on not cussing so much, but hey, it might happen. I'm just letting you know.
It's the passion and the,
because this is, and like we were also talking about that, which this is a bigger issue. But like, how did white people decide that, like, hey, we just want to take over? Like, we want to be the supreme race and we want dominance over all living things, or at least living human beings. So I'm like, where did this, like, how did they get here? Like, what was going on? I know you say you're reading the book Cass, which actually I need to read that book myself. And it has some fascinating discoveries in that too.
Yeah, it does. It definitely gives a better picture of the United States and sort of frames it in, obviously, this caste system that's based on really the color of your skin. And it's that, and and how white people were able to continue to keep dominance primarily over Blacks. But then it kind of you start looking at the Latinx population, and the how that played into Mexico and Mexicans and natives and even the ripple effects that it has to this day as well. So if you haven't read it, I suggest you read it if get a chance to read it, because I think it's definitely gives you a glimpse, especially if you've never thought of the United States having a caste system, and what that looks like and how it started. So I don't think a lot of people really view our history through that lens.
Yeah, I think a lot of white people probably don't. I think maybe even us a few of us people of color, because we always talk about other countries, primarily, India, they have they have a known caste system.
Yeah.
It is a structure. So that, of course, is one that I know about. But I think here in America, because also in many ways, America's two-faced it. They want to be this land to welcome people, and we're made up of all different people, but at the same time, they want to treat everybody else who's not white like shit. And I feel like a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that it's a caste system, or they want to use their own made up word to call it something else. But it is. It's a caste system ever since Christopher Columbus brought his white ass over here. I'm just almost
drink some water. No, it just makes me, like I said in the beginning, it just makes me so upset to have to talk through it and think that what white people have done and continue to do over this like made up thought, like it's made up, like someone just sort of said, this is the truth, this is how it should be, and in no way. And one of the things when you were talking about like where this came from, where it started, like I definitely think that at one point during this series, this journey is looking at religion, particularly Christianity.
Oh, that's
I think that definitely plays into it. We know that people have used the Bible for a lot of atrocities, and still do. And I think particularly we look at the United States, and one of the things that the cast book talks about, and I haven't finished the book, so I don't know if it goes into more detail about it, but one thing that I know I have just my own personal research and reading is this idea of white Christian nationalism, and what it means, and how white people have used Christianity to keep that power, to keep that dominance, and sort of justify, you think about like justification of slavery, and all these things, and how especially in the United States, like God has blessed this country, and like all this sort of narrative that you kind of continue, it's woven into our Constitution, it's woven it, like all these things that we see, and it's interesting. I definitely think that white Christian nationalism is something that definitely has played in, not just here, but in the past.
I never even heard that term. White. I mean, I've heard them separately, but all together in a phrase. I ain't never heard that. I mean, I have heard, and this again is something I've heard. I don't know what research is out there, but I do remember hearing when I was younger is why you don't see a large amount of Black people, I'll say African Americans, that are not, that are Catholic, because the Catholic Church, of course, slavery was going on back then too. So it's like, and the Catholic Church has been around since forever. And because the Catholic Church refused it, like they basically refused to acknowledge slavery. And a lot of that turned a lot of Black people or African Americans off from Catholicism, because the Catholics didn't stand up and take a stand. Now, I don't know. This is, again, something that I heard growing up in the South. Right. And I grew up a Baptist, as I've stated on here before. So I don't know, but I think that's so interesting, because I know you are like a social justice Christian superwoman warrior. And,
like that.
I ain't there yet, but I'm always so interested in how people have manipulated people using religion, and how it makes me think of, at least for Blacks and brown people, the majority of us are very religious. Like either, you know, we are
Yeah.
evangelistic, or I don't know if that's the right word, evangelist, yes, Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, whatever. The majority of us are of,
Yeah.
you know, we grew up in church. A lot of us
Mhm.
still go to church. And I always just wonder, how does that? How does religion? Okay, I know we're getting ahead, but I just got
No,
a lot of thoughts.
if y'all been following our channel, you know that we kind of go on tangents once in a while,
Too.
and we try to circle back to what we initially-
We are. But yes, I'm agreeing with you. I think religion would be another great one to talk about in terms of white supremacy. Because, you know, like we always say, white supremacy is woven in everything.
Yeah.
I don't care what they say. I don't care if they say, well, what about kids TV shows? It's in there too.
It's in there. Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's
It is
everywhere.
everywhere. I mean, just the idea that you're gonna when you think about Christopher Columbus, you think about that whole discovering the Americas, the idea that you can come to land that is inhabited by people, like people live here, were here, had culture, had the way of life, and because they didn't follow what you thought was the norm or what should, you know, society be like, you classify them as nothing, and think that you kind of use whatever weaponry and all these things to kind of just trick and take and just steal the land. It's like, yeah, you definitely just went out here. And like I remember reading when I was, you know, in school, the few one of the few times that I heard was, you know, people using, you know, you're gonna go out there and, you know, preach the gospel of God, and you're gonna use that as the reasoning behind you kind of taking over. And I'm like, well, that's, I mean, he didn't say go steal people's land.
Oh. Now he said to share the word, but you can share the word and you ain't gotta take people hostage or make them slaves.
No, you know, and you so it's just this whole like, so you know, I think to our earlier point, like there is that correlation, but when you think about that supremacy word, that word supremacy, and how it really just stamped everything, and you know, and I think of like Spain coming into Mexico, and sort of dominating there and wanting to take over, and the ramification that's had for really just Latin America, as in general,
Mhm.
and just that to this day, you know, I think we talk about the United States often. We talk about Native Americans a lot, and how white supremacy really has worked so hard to erase just Native Americans, like, from people's minds. Because sometimes you like, I remember just sort of like, to me, it just seemed like they were in the past, like they're from the past.
Well, honey, they don't put them in the past now because they don't even take they've taken the American Indian woman off of the land. What is it? Land of Lakes Butter. And you know, that's been everywhere. People like, isn't this typical white people? You remove the Indian, you keeping the products.
Yep.
So okay. And that's just a very simplified version of
Yeah.
this. But it's just like, that's not the point.
We know, like, and that's the thing, like when you think about sort of white supremacy in the United States and sort of how it started, I mean, you think back at Native Americans, like, and the indigenous people that lived here, and how that, and then how it escalated, you know, how it escalated, became, you know, slavery and blacks, and bringing blacks because they couldn't, you know, they either couldn't get natives to become slaves and do what they wanted, and things like that. So they needed to find some other form of servitude, and they went and, you know, outsourced people. Like, how do you outsource people? Like,
And all the way across the world, baby. They went all the way to Africa. Damn. I mean, you know, that's I don't even know all that backstory either. In terms of, I mean, of course, we know about the transatlantic slave trade and we know that. But I myself, that's research. I'm definitely needing to do in terms of how did, like, why? like they went over here to Africa and just, and you know, and of course we know like there were some African tribes who gave slaves to them. Like that's also a part that people don't want to talk about too. Like, but you know, we don't know the conditions in which people gave up. I don't know. Maybe they were being threatened.
Tricked. I don't know. Like
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they were forced to, because I've often thought about that in terms of colonialism in Mexico and in Latin America. Because I'm thinking these tribes down there, like these people must have been horrified. Like just some people come and say, like, again, I don't know how they welcomed themselves to the natives. I don't know how that story happened, but I'm just thinking, at one point, did it become like, okay, we're here to take over? Was it from the offset, or did they try to befriend them and like, well, we just gonna sleep with your women and rape them, and we just going to steal all your stuff? Like, what happened? Like, it's just, that just sounds terrifying.
Yeah, like one of the things that I think I'm curious is to actually talk to like natives, right, and then like to an indigenous group individual, and hear it from them, because I've only ever have heard it and read about it through white lens.
Yeah.
Or like I don't have any other point of reference out of that, so I haven't really dug in. Like I don't know who to read, or like how to like get that sort of like that real history of like what really happened. And I'm sure there's documented, like if y'all have any book recommendations or documentaries that are not from a white centric lens, please drop it in the comments. I think that's something that I think both Martina and I are very interested in. Like we've been talking about like doing more research and wanting to learn as we talk through our perspectives and what we see, because I mean education I think is key to kind of dismantling a lot of the past and really kind of reckoning with it, because like as you were talking, I was like, man, I've only ever read history from books that were written by white men, and they're gonna give a very different narrative,
a very different limited narrative.
That's going to favor white people. It's going to favor, I mean, especially the United States, everything is going to favor the United States, being this great country and being this, and not to say, I remember when I was reading Obama's book, he said something of like the ideals and what the United States could be is what he kind of clings to. Is I'm paraphrasing, and I don't remember exactly the words. And it's like, like that, our Constitution, our our Bill of Rights, and all those things of like what it could mean that we're all created equal, right? Like that sort of sentiment and all, like that is what people I think cling to and want to see, but the reality isn't there yet. But it could be if we just really reckon with the white supremacist history that we have and the systems that like, even like when you think about the definition, like the social, economic, and political systems, like all of that is still very much today, and we see it. I mean, once we get into sort of the 2020 and how that all came really to play and all to fruition, but it's definitely a journey that I think, I mean, Martina, I'll turn it over to you in a second. Like, really, I think for you and I to really kind of dig in and learn more as we research, as we kind of go through these conversations, because there's just so many things that everyone has to just question, because we haven't.
I hope so. And we're going to get ready to wrap up this first video. This is just like an interlude. And we're going to go into the COVID and white supremacy video up next. But before we do that, yes, I will say, that it was a video I sent to you about, it's the actor. I won't say his name just in case he watched this video and I love him. But he was just saying how he was on set working with a white actress, and she was saying that, I just feel so guilty about what's going on. And he's like, well, why are you feeling guilty? Like, you feeling guilty because you're benefiting off what your ancestors did, but that's not on you. Like, you can make a difference. You can be the difference. And just like we can't help what happened to our ancestors, but here we are, considered the more less fortunate, the less privileged group of people out of these scenarios. And he was just basically saying, you know what, white people, just kind of leave us alone. And I feel like that every now and then. I do. Because I'm like, and I think like with everything that happened with COVID, it just exacerbated everything. And it's so interesting to me because I sit on different committees, and I've got different presentations, as you too as well. And a lot of them, or a number of them, are predominantly white people, on these committees and things like that. Okay, so you have that similar experience. And just to hear them, I was on a webinar earlier this week. We were talking about COVID here in Chicago, actually, and how basically what I just said, COVID has exacerbated more so in Black and brown communities, vulnerable populations, elderly people. It's like all the different ways it has impacted this city. But then what this speaker did on the webinar was really good. She went back and did a little bit of history of Chicago. Like, she talked about the redlining and how I didn't even know, like, that came out of banking. It was banks that decided about like how the districts and how the parts of the city were going to be outlined, based on who could get improvement for a home or the value. And it just so happened that the Black and brown populations were less valued, and the white part of the cities were more valued. I don't know how they got to that conclusion, but I was like, okay, so she did her due diligence here. I think she did a really good job on that presentation. But it was just very interesting to see how the white participants were Googling. Well, they were not Googling, but they were typing in questions and were like, how can I support different organizations, or just questions along that line. And, at that point, because it was a good presentation, as I said, but I'm just like, girl, if you don't go Google something, if you don't go, like, almost everybody's on social media. Go to these organizations' websites, go to their social media pages, like, see how you can get involved. But it's still so mind-boggling to me that people still have to ask that question. How can white people, because I feel like, I don't know if a lot of them, they just can't quite figure it out. They don't know what to do. And I will say, being white right now is not the greatest thing either. And I leave us with that.
Yeah, I think when you said something of like, white people kind of wanting to step in and help, like, I think of the times where white people, in whether it's career or just personal life, they like try to step in and sort of do something that they think will be helpful, but it's definitely like you're kind of stepping into an area that you don't have to. Like,
you're stepping
like,
out of your lane.
I was like, you don't have, like, I don't need you to step in to help, or you think you're doing me a favor, but it's really kind of putting me in like this awkward kind of situation, or it's just making the atmosphere awkward where you're kind of doing something. So it's definitely like, just take a moment, like, before you even say or do something, like, just take a pause, like, take a moment and think through, like, why you want to do it. Like, think through, like, I think people don't ask themselves, like, why do I feel the need to do this, or why am I feeling like I have to step in for
guilt. I think they just guilt, like we were just saying, they feel guilty.
I think some of it is guilt. I wonder how much they just feel sort of like this need to just like seem like they're being an ally and like wanting to do this, and like, but it's just like you said, like that, that actor, like, sometimes you can just leave us alone. Like, you can just, because we have clearly navigated this well and have continued, and we will, do that. And, you can do more in your circles like your circles and your white circles.
But don't come over here. Try to tell us.
Because we, like, I mean, one of the things that you and I talk about is sort of how can we get definitely within Black and brown and other communities to really work together more. And sometimes, white people try to do it and it's just not, because you have to remember you represent white supremacy, unfortunately, right? Like, you, even if you are the best of allies and the best, of like, you're in the trenches with us, like, you still represent white supremacy. And that is hard, I think, for a lot of people to separate when you're trying to help, because it's like, at the end of the day, you get to go home, you get to not have to worry about someone saying something about you because of the color of your skin, looking at you kind of weird, wondering why,
whatever, like, yeah, you can turn it off and go home, and you ain't an activist no more. And that's what I mean when I say, like, it's kind of hard for white people right now. I don't have sympathy for them, but that's what I mean.
Right, yeah, like,
it's hard for them to try to figure out how to tread right now. And I think that's just the way it is. It's, this is a world that they have created this. Like, it may not be this white person directly in the 21st century, but
you're benefiting.
They have benefited from it. So they have just further made the situation worse. And it's almost as like they don't know what to do, but some of them are trying to figure out what to do. And I think, look, you just gotta figure it out. Sometimes I don't know what to tell you. I didn't create this problem. I know you didn't either, but it is what it is. One of us, a lot better.
Yeah. And I think I think we can end with sort of saying, like, when I go back to the definition, and it talks about that socioeconomical and political systems that really enable white people. And I think if you could just acknowledge that you benefit from these systems, and that you're going to figure out what your role is in figuring out how to change that's more than enough at the moment. Like, just figure out what your role is in that, and figure out, like, how do you fit in that. And and I think a lot of white people have a hard time acknowledging that they benefit from white supremacy, and I think that's what makes a lot of Black and brown people upset, because it's like, if you can't acknowledge that, then you're not fully in.
You're not. And it's great point you made. Oh, girl, I know we got to wrap up, but it's a great point.
Go ahead. I think we got a few minutes.
Because I think, because sometimes white people say, well, you're also privileged too. Like, you've been able to go to college, or, you make this amount of money. Yeah. I never said I wasn't privileged in the ways of education, maybe. I mean, even though the Mississippi school system sucks. Sorry, Mississippi, but it did. And I'm sure it still does. It is the South. Love y'all.
Chicago's not better.
Okay, like, it's just the United States. The United States school system just sucks in general. I mean, it just does. But it's so interesting. They say, and I'm like, yeah, I have privilege. I do have privilege. I recognize that,
and we acknowledge it.
I acknowledge my privilege.
Yes,
I acknowledge that I'm more privileged than my parents in a lot of ways, and probably more ways than they will ever be in life. I am more privileged. I've been able to do things and will continue to be able to do things because of the privilege I have given myself. Nobody's given it to me. I've had to go and get this privilege myself. And I think that's often a lot of things with people of color. Nobody's looking out for us. Like, we try to look out for each other, but you and I've talked about that too. A lot of interracial shit goes on between the races that we can't build ourselves up. So anything that we've done, we've had to do it ourselves. We don't have somebody always, of course, my mama will say, well, baby, I'm praying for you every day. So my mom, my mama, daddy, and Jesus looking out for me, and my grandma. Yes, they are looking out for me. But the things that I've wanted to do in life, I've had to go and just do it and like make my own way. And that's often the case with a lot of kids of like immigrants or kids of parents of color. You got to go try to make your own way. Like, nobody's handing out, like, mentorships.
And it's 100 times harder.
It's harder, which is why I think, and I think that's often things white people get confused about. Yes, I have privilege, but I recognize mine, and I had to go get that privilege. I could have stayed where other people in my family have been and ain't done shit and make nothing of myself. But I knew that's not the life I wanted to lead. So I had to go and find that privilege for myself. That's not innate. It wasn't born with me. It was not, and never will be.
And the systems weren't in place for you to be able to reach those goals, to sort of access the tools and resources that you needed to succeed. Like I mean, we've talked about this before, like the digging and the looking and the sort of talking to other people that are probably in the same boat. Say, how did you access that? Like, how were you able to get those scholarships? How were you able to like get in like those recommendations? Like, if you can just do like recommendation letters and all these things that we just had to figure out because it just wasn't there, or the system wasn't in place to help you create those opportunities, to reach those opportunities. It goes back to what you were saying, like when we finally get it and figure it out, you and I are in our careers, now in our 30s, and it's like, but we acknowledge that we do have privileges. Yes, I do, but I still have to fight for them every day. Like, it's not guaranteed. It's not like just assumed. Like, I still have to fight for those privileges every day. And I have to battle assumptions that people have about me because of whether it's my race, whether it's just of who I am or what they have. And it's like there's all these barriers to sort of things. And I don't walk into a room and people are like, well, that's somebody. But a white person, whether it's male or female, and you're just talking about like just white, they're like, oh, okay, she's somebody, she might be more important than me. Like, if a white person comes into a room and we're walking at the same time, they're gonna look at that white person first before they look at me. And it's like, and I think that's where that having to acknowledge that privilege is just, you have to work on that. Because I know people in my circles that don't want to acknowledge their privilege.
Yep, exactly.
Or try to deny it, or try to like make it something that it isn't. Oh, girl, I know
we could. Okay. Subscribers, followers, TikTokers, all of y'all, please comment. Anything, like Lyzeth said, suggestions around books, documentaries, even speakers, TV shows, whatever, works of literature, just around white supremacy in general, but also, comment on what, on your ideas, if you are open to doing that, which we always welcome. And we say just always be respectful. We know we talk about a lot of heavy hitting issues, but one thing we all can do is respect each other. So we are gonna head on out, but then we'll be right back. All right. See y'all in just a bit. Later.